If you're taking up beach fishing, probably the first thing you need to know is how to read a beach. Today I want to talk about reading and understanding surf beaches. Lots of people speak of reading a beach, but very few talk about understanding the beach. There is a difference. Beaches come in all shapes and sizes. We have long beaches, we have short beaches, and everything in between. Usually at one end of the beach there's a headland, or both ends of the beach there are headlands, but often there's a river or a creek coming from one end, and then the other end will have a headland. Beaches are made up of fine particles, some are made up of coarse particles, some are made of even stones and rocks. Now a headland's a fairly important structure on the beach. What happens with headlands is water rushes up, hits the rocks, gouging out the sand with that extra water flow, making deep holes there. Often this is a great place to drop a line because there's often fish sitting in that deeper water. So let's just have a look at how you read the structure out there. How do you know where there are sandbars? How do you know where there are gutters? For the experienced beach fisherman, this is quite easy. Basically, where the wave's breaking, that's shallow water. The wave can't hold the energy any longer and it's forced to lift up and break. If it's not breaking, it's an indication that there's deeper water there. So this is what we're looking for, the change between deep and shallow water. Of course, the particles of sand on a beach are so fine, they are easily shifted by wave action. Consequently, the structure of a beach is always changing. From low tide to high tide, there's a lot of movement of the sand. Then you get a small swell, not much movement. The swell increases, gets bigger and bigger. The bigger it gets, the more sand movement there is. So sandbars are continually changing. Gutters are continually changing depending on tide, swell size. Now if we have a look at the sand in the intertidal zone, that is between the low and the high tide, it appears to be void of any life whatsoever. But in actual fact, it's loaded with microorganisms, microbes, even small animals, crustaceans like crabs, there's pippies there, all sorts of things are in that intertidal zone. Most of it's under the sand where it's looking to be protected, but still being able to feed off that salt water that's washing in and out. They're deep in the sand to protect themselves from not only predators, birds and the like, but also too heavy a swell coming in. Once they're under the surface, the energy of the wave runs across the surface, so it's not interfering with their life. So they bury for protection. They're quite smart too. I mean, I once thought that pippies just aimlessly got washed around in the surf. They didn't have any control over what they're doing. After a close study of them, I found that they were actually in full control of their movements. You would see a lot of pippies in one spot under the surface. You could just see the top of them just under the surface. And then in an instance, it's like someone yelled out, "Okay boys, let's go." So with an incoming tide, they would all rise to the surface at the one time when they could detect the energy of that bigger wave coming. It would wash them up the beach, and within 5 to 10 seconds they would rebury again further up the beach, and they would sit there for a while waiting for that next powerful wave to come. They'd all rise to the surface again and get washed further up the beach. This was to enable them to get away from any predators that might be looking to eat them, like brim for instance. They like pippies. So then as the tide went out, they would again do that in reverse. They would come to the surface. As the tide was rushing back down the beach, they would get washed back down. When they got to a certain spot, they would bury again, but not too far out. They don't want to go out into that deeper water where the fish are waiting for them. So yes, they are very smart. Beachworms are another little animal in the intertidal zone between the low and high water mark. Now they don't move up and down the beach like a pippy. However, they will stay down under the surface of the sand until the waves start coming up with that incoming tide. Then they'll start to rise up looking for food as the wave washes back down the beach, looking for anything that might be there. Like it could be weed, it could be a dead fish, could be anything that washes down there waiting there to grab it. What I've found too is that beach worms have an amazing ability to be able to detect the energy of the wave before it arrives. So they'll be coming up as the waves are coming in. Then there may be the sets come through, like bigger, more powerful waves. And before they come, you might be there with your bait waving it in the wave to try and get them to the surface, but suddenly they won't come with this big wave. So they know that the energy of this bigger wave is coming, so they don't come up for that. They're just waiting for that smaller wave that's not going to knock their head off. Now there's also the likes of sea snails. You don't see them very often on the beach, but they are there from time to time. They are a little bit smarter in that they can bury under the sand. But what they feed on is often pippies. I took a video once of a sand snail burying into the sand, and suddenly in front of it, this pippy popped up, escaping. It was food for that sand snail, so it was getting out of there pretty quick. So not always being under the sand is going to give them total protection. There'll be something always after them. Another little creature often found in the intertidal zone closer to the low tide mark are hermit crabs. Since hermit crabs don't grow their own shells, they need to find a discarded shell that fits their current body size. So they will regularly change their shell size. Since they are a good source of food for some fish, they will attract fish to the immediate area. Often you'll get small fish right up in that shallow water. In this case, it's a small flounder. Just look at the camouflage though. So you need to look hard and be really observant to spot these little guys, as they are the same colour as the surrounding sand. Now here's another interesting little fellow right up in that shallow water again. It's clear, it's about 3 inches long, but just check out its eyes. It appears to have little lights inside its head, lighting up its eyes. Very interesting, and it's the first time I've sighted one of these. Now, understanding that this intertidal zone is a highly productive area holding lots and lots of small species, it's understandable that fish will be coming in looking for an easy feed in these areas. Now, the fish won't necessarily be up on the sandbars, but they'll be waiting for the runoff from those sandbars and from the edge of the intertidal zone. So you really do need to observe which way the currents are running. That is the local current coming off those sandbars, which way it's going. Is it going north? Is it going south? Because if you can then establish this, you can just about guarantee if there's fish around, they'll be waiting in those areas. So these are the spots that you do really need to drop your bait. So you've arrived at a beach, a new beach for instance, and you're trying to work out where should I fish. Well, if you know what the tide is, you can look for sandbars and gutters. As I said, where the waves are breaking, that's the shallower water. I like to fish in the deeper water around the low tide and as it rises. And you've got to think that the fish will be coming up onto that shallower water as the tide rises. So where those waves are breaking, I like to fish on high tide. As the tide runs out, I look for where the water's running off those sandbars. So you've got to really detect which way the current's going. Ultimately, that'll be taking food off that sandbar into the deeper water where the fish will be waiting for an easy feed. The other spot I like to fish is adjacent to rocks. where the sand's gouged out adjacent to the rocks, often you'll get fish sitting in there, ambushing anything that might come into that gutter. Like flathead, they love to sit in a little spot like that, waiting to ambush any small fish that might be washed in there. If you're fishing for tailor, for instance, look to fish under the whitewater. They like to go in there and ambush fish that can't see them. The small fish often get in under that whitewater for protection. The water's not as clear, so they anticipate the bigger predator fish won't see them. However, tailor get in there knowing that these small fish are going to be there. So if you're fishing for tailor, get your bait in under that whitewater. Lures work really well with tailor. They like a moving bait. So you will catch them on still baits, but look for that moving bait in under that white water. Brim and high tides love being up in that shallow water. Whiting as well, up in that shallow water as the tide rises. Let's talk about long beaches. Long beaches have lots of sandbars, consequently have lots of gutters spread out right along the beach. They could be 50, 100 metres apart. If you're fishing on a longer beach, again, you can fish the sandbars for species as I've mentioned, or you can fish that deeper water as the water rushes off those sandbars into that deeper water and out to sea. Bigger predators like mulloway are likely to be there. However, I have caught mulloway right up in shallow water on top of a sandbar at the top of the tide in, you know, a metre and a half of water. I've even caught snapper off the beach in very shallow water. I caught a 10 kilo snapper once in 2.5 metres of water. So don't discard the fact that it's water's shallow. You can often get big species of fish coming right in that shallow water. On a shorter beach, you might get a current running right along the short beach and then out where the rocks are. The end of where that water's running down the beach and going out, in around that area, within 100 metres of that area, is usually a pretty good spot to try and catch a fish. There are times when there's been a big swell where a lot of kelp and weed and crap has broken off out at sea and it gets washed up on the beach. If you go at night, you may not see where these banks of kelp are. Often they'll congregate in one spot, and if you cast your line there, often you can't pull the damn thing in because it's get covered in so much kelp it becomes too heavy for the line. So you want to try and avoid those spots. Often that kelp will accumulate in the deeper water. So it's best to look in the daytime and see if there's kelp accumulating in a certain spots along that beach, because that's the last place you'll want to fish. Often the sandbars are a better option after a big swell, because they're normally cleaner and clear out the kelp quicker than in the deeper holes. Like I say, the kelp tends to accumulate in these deep holes. So if you're going to a beach at night, how do you detect where the deep holes are and the shallow water out in the water, especially around the new moon when it's quite dark? Well, there are clues that might help. Quite a steep bank, we can see where it's cut away, and if you look immediately out here, it's really deep water right in close. And so at night, when you're looking for that deep water, look for these steep banks, steep beach, and yeah, you'll be in with a chance. You can just about guarantee straight out from that steep bank that goes out that the water's going to be deep in close. Where the beach is flat, generally it's flat going right out. You may wish to fish in that deep hole at night, provided there's no kelp in there. But you'll soon find out if you cast out and you can't bring your line in. No one said it was going to be easy. The more time you spend on the beach, the better you get to know it, especially if you're observant. Often the birds will give you clues as to what's going on. They may be diving out off the surf. You know there's bait fish there. You'll watch seagulls and they'll run along the edge and they're picking up microscopic stuff that you can't even see, and I often wondered what it is that they're picking up, but they seem to be feeding there. Just as the wave washes up, they'll go rushing down. I can't see a damn thing, but they obviously can. keeping your eyes peeled out on the surf, on the surface and in the waves will often give you a clue as to what sort of fish are frequenting the area. As a wave's about to break, you'll often see them swimming through the wave. Or you'll see them on the surface, especially in the case of mullet, as in this shot. Here we have massive schools of mullet just lingering in the surf. And you can just about guarantee that big species of fish will know that they're here and won't be too far away. Species like sharks, mulloway are sure to be close by. At other times you may just see the tails sticking out of the water. As in this case, these are salmon. There will be other times when the fish won't be on the surface and they will appear as a black mass under the surface. It may look like a heap of weed or even a shadow from a cloud. So the beaches that do have a headland one end and then a river at the other end, as I said, the headland is quite good in around there where the water's gouged the sand out. But don't discard the other end where the river's running out. Often there's food coming out of that river and there'll be bigger fish in there looking for any food that may be running out. I've often caught a lot of flathead in around the sand at the entrance to a river, especially run out tide where they're sitting there waiting to ambush any little fish that might be coming out with the tide. So timing when you're fishing can be pretty important. A lot of people fish the high tide, some fish the low. I often fish in between. So I'm fishing more by the moon because I believe that the moon has a greater effect on your fishing than either your high or low tides. It can trigger the fish into feeding, provided you can find a spot where they're going to be hanging out. Good chance they're going to be feeding at certain times. Now I studied this for 45, 50 years now, and I've had thousands of records of which I've analysed, and I've actually put it together in book form, and it's called Fishing the Lunar Connection. Now it's available on Amazon if you're interested, but there's, I guess, 40 or 50 years of records stacked into a single book. So you can save yourself a lot of time if you read through that and then follow what it says. Go when it says to go, and you'll find your catch will improve, sometimes dramatically. If you're fishing in a fishing comp, like I've fished in a lot of fishing comps, and I've won a lot of comps too, where I've fished a lot less time than some of the other guys that have been fishing, well, most of the other guys that have been fishing in the comp. Anyway, it's worth having a look at. It's called Fishing the Lunar Connection. So it's available on amazon.com.au if you are interested. So what happens when there's no swell? Well, there's not much food being stirred up, so there's a good chance there's not going to be too many fish in there. I have found that banjo rays, stingrays, shovel-nosed rays, for instance, do tend to get there when it's quite flat, and they just sort of fossick around the bottom looking for a bit of tucker. But generally, because it's not stirred up and there's no food being released, there tends to be very few fish there. Anyway, if you've enjoyed today's episode, by all means, if you haven't already, subscribe and like and share, it'd be nice as well. And we'll catch you next time. Bye for now. Thanks for watching.